Hey, and welcome back everybody to the Murphy table. I have set up here kind of the first scenario for Heroes of Normandie. I guess that's a lot closer than we would like it to be, but essentially here, don't mind my messy man cave here. Trying to get the table, as much on the table as we can fit. So there's quite a bit of game here. And let's see, I've even got some down here, cards and things like that. What I want to do is just talk about some of the elements of the game, kind of how they set up, and then I want to talk about kind of my first thoughts in playing the first scenario, which I have set up here. I didn't place the units yet, but I want to talk about that. So let's talk about if you were going to set up your scenario and actually play. So they actually have these really cool scenario books. I'm going to have to hold the camera because my tripod is kind of difficult to set up on the fly, if you will. So the scenario, just about every page in here has got a scenario. And it will tell you the map layouts. And as you go further into the book, they get more complicated with bigger maps, terrain overlays, more units to play. So you definitely want to start with like the first scenario and work your way forward. That way you get a real good chance to kind of cement some of the rules and ideas. The rules currently in their, let's see, I got the rules over here. In the version, what is this, 1.2b, I think this is. Yeah, 1.2b of August 2014. That's the most current on the website, so it includes a lot of the errata and suggestions from the community. So the rules are actually pretty good. You can still go to Board Game Geek and see people asking questions. I mean, I can understand that a person would want a rule set that answers everything perfectly. This does lead some things to interpretation because it's not necessarily a completely rules light game, but I'd say on a complexity level it's between excuse me, Memoir 44 and Conflict of Heroes like Storms of Steel or Awakening the Bear. So it's still a good gateway game. There's still some complexity there, but the scenarios, there's enough kind of a wiggle room that you can kind of suspend that simulation feel. This is not Advanced Squad Leader, but it's not just roll a dice and see who wins. There's some strategy. So definitely start at the first scenario, work your way towards the back of the book. That way you can introduce yourself to those more complicated concepts. Not that they get very complicated, but you're going to start out with some infantry and then move on to vehicles. So it's a good layout. I've played some games that have scenario books and the complexity of the scenarios are mixed together, so they don't go from kind of that the easiest first. Your easiest scenario might be towards the back of the scenario book, so you're starting out with like real complicated scenarios. So this helps facilitate the game learning. So anyway, your scenario book will detail out some things like your turn tracker. So we're going to have the initiative tracker here, so however many turns you're doing. Then on this side, it's great, these little tokens to remind you when different things happen. So like for the first scenario, the files that you have to pick up, they drop here on turn 2, and then they got this little exclamation mark to remind you that something happened. So you just look at the scenario and it tells you here's what happens on the supply phase of turn 2, and then here's one event here at 3. So again, you just flip back to the book and look and see what happens there at that time, and then here's where the turn ends. And then as each turn progresses, you just move that initiative tracker, and then okay, at the end of turn 6, let's see who wins. So that's a nice, simple, handy dandy tracker. So there's your scenario book. There's the rules. I have some the unused map boards. That's the other thing too with this scenario. It's real good. Great job in letting you know which boards I need. The boards are labeled nicely. Here's the orientation of the boards and what side your unit's set up, and then any special conditions of the maps, which is what we have over here. Here's the map. So for this first scenario, let's see, tripod balance. So it tells me to put this C2B facing this way, and C1B up here in that corner facing that way. And that gives me my map board. And then here's the vehicle damage markers. Now they're doing that because the files in this scenario drop randomly. So you roll a die 6 and you just stick it on the corresponding number. That's where the files drop. When you set up your side to play the scenario, you take the corresponding platoon that you're given per the scenario setup. You take out the base forces that make up that platoon. So I have them right here. Later, on turn 3, you get a light vehicle, which is the half track here. So I have that just sitting on the board ready to come on. Then you get your cards. This scenario tells you what cards to take out, and the rest you just sit down. You also take out artillery and aircraft support cards because you don't use those in the first scenario. You have a hand of 4. So I've laid out my 4 cards, so when I play, since I'm going to do this solo, they'll be face up here for me to look at. And let's see, on camera, any extra pieces I'll have here in my trays to grab. I should probably turn this around because now that I've drawn my forces, my suppressed tokens are back there. But anything else, if I did need something, I can grab it from there. Generally though, once I have the scenario set up, I could put these back in the box. The only thing I didn't pull out was my dice. So I'll need my dice. And then the order blocks. There's my bluff. There we go. So for like my American player, here's the 4 order blocks I start with, and my dice. And I would do the same thing for the German setup. So I'll just set those off to the side. Once you have all your basic components out, this actually sets up quicker than how I'm explaining. So, you know, that's something to look forward to. It does play quicker than I am showing you. Alright. I know, I call it a man cave, but I share it with the baby. We have our baby. So sometimes I get to capture some of her stuff in the background. Okay. Alright, so when you play the game, it's very simple. Usually a lot of times you're going to roll, or if the scenario does not specify who has initiative, you can just do a simple roll off here. And German got a 6, so I can put them first. I put the turn tracker out of view here. You probably can't see everything, but that gives you an idea like who would act first. And then sometimes the scenario will tell you the person who wins initiative, they'll set up first, or it will say Germans place first. So everything is included in that scenario. Here, because the Germans had initiative, you know, I could just set up in the board, or the scenario tells you where on the board. Usually it's within the first 2 squares, so I can just set them up. Fire group, fire group. And even this is important. For this scenario especially, I'm not going to play the full game, but I'm going to kind of recap what I've had encountered in my first playthrough. When you're recon, because your recon, they have a special ability. They can come on kind of concealed instead of on their deployed side, so they can come on the board concealed. Also, because they have the scout ability, let's see here if you can read that. That 3 tells me they can deploy up to 3 squares from the edge of their deployment zone. So I like to deploy them concealed, and then within 3, I'll put them here on some cover. The terrain, if there's any need to know things about the terrain, like the hedges, they'll actually tell you in this little information block that whether it's passable or impassable terrain, any defensive bonuses. I'm just looking to see if I found anything interesting. Okay, so anyway, once you have your troops on the board, put my leader. This is another thing that gets some concern from the game, is your limited orders. When you play a small campaign, you get a number of orders equal to the star here. So this platoon will give you 1 star if you buy an option in here. For the base game that I'm playing, the first scenario, because you don't place any additional units, you don't get a command order for this section. Instead, you have to rely on what's here for your commander, your captain there. So you're going to get 2. I pull a 3rd out because you do get some cards. Well, they actually have a better... Oh, let me see if I have it here. You actually can get some cards that would give you a special order, extra order token. So I usually pull that out. And let's see. Germans, it's the same thing. You get 2 orders. I can't see that. So you had to look here. Now, if I was able to purchase, I could get 3 orders. So it's really limiting. That's probably the biggest complaint. It's real limiting on these small scenarios, because if that lieutenant dies, who has the 2 stars attached to him, if he dies, you can't place any more orders, and therefore you lose the game. So a lot of times in these small games, it's not that big a deal. I just keep the commander way back out of the action. So he's back here. I might not move him forward, because if he dies, then I've lost the game, because I need that to place my order tokens. Let's just throw some Americans out here. So let's say I have taken a couple turns in. This particular scenario, where's my recon? I've realized that with this particular scenario, depending on how lucky you are, when the orders drop, if your recon unit can be in the spot where the orders drop, you've pretty much won the game, because recon, when they're on their camouflage side, they cannot be targeted for direct fire, and they cannot be affected by burst damage, like from grenades, because this represents the fact that they're not actually there. Like, you don't know they're there, they're concealed, so they might actually be, you know, somewhere else on the board. That's where you think they are. Now, granted, if I flip them over to their action side, then you know it's a recon team and they're there. They don't reappear somewhere at random, but this simulates the randomness of a concealed recon team. So that was one thing that I hadn't heard a lot of people talk about rules-wise for playing the first scenario, is your recon group. They can be a big game changer. So depending on how you roll, like if I had my recon unit up here, you know, well, I rolled a 6, so the files would drop down here. So there's some luck in deploying your troops. You might want to move your recon unit up towards the middle. That way, wherever the orders land, you can try to move your recon unit quickly to pick up the orders when they drop. The other thing too that I found when I played, when I was playing, I had tried to put my units in positions where they could shoot, provide cover for each other, and they eventually, you know, kind of started pushing up, because I wanted to. There's only 6 turns. The files drop on turn 2, I want to make sure that I have as many people forward to grab units or to grab the files. There's not a whole lot of sitting back and just shooting. You constantly have to be moving. So this game really kind of emphasizes a aggressive gameplay other than your leader. You know, it's weird because your leader, since the game is Heroes of Normandie, I kind of agree. It seems odd that your hero / potential leaders have to sit back, because if they die, you lose your orders. So you're aggressive with all your other units. Now the way the turn works is in the orders phase, you have, where's my bluff block? You have your orders. You're going to assign what units you want to act, and in the order you want them to act. And you have this third block, which is a bluff block, so that your opponent doesn't know exactly what you plan on doing. I think it's kind of clever, because you don't have to lay these down as 1, 2, 3. You don't have to lay them in the order. I mean, I could place my bluff block first, and then I could place my number 2, my number 1. So my opponent doesn't know the order I'm deciding my units to act in. Sometimes it's obvious, like if the files, let's say I had a unit here, let's say I had a unit up here. I don't think he would have got that far, but let's say he did. And if the files dropped on this number 2 spot, well, since the idea is to pick the orders up, I probably would mark him number 1. So you can kind of guess, based on the situation, what your opponent might do, and then how you might want to respond with your limited orders in kind. So we would put like a 1 there, a 2 there. I leave them up. You can put them down. Most of the time people put them down. It's just that for me, by leaving them up, it just helps me quickly visualize which was my first. And then your opposing player, he'd have his blocks out. He would also lay them out. And you lay these out alternating. So the initiative player would put one of his blocks. The opponent player would put one of his blocks. Once your orders have been placed, then the player with initiative, he'd reveal his first unit. So I'd say, okay, here's my number 1. I'm going to either move an assault or shoot. I would do his activity, and then my opponent would lay his number 1. And you go back and forth like that, starting with your lowest initiative number and working your way to your highest initiative, which for here would be the 2 orders you get with your platoon. So I'd do his number 2. Then the bluff is there just to throw off potentially what you might actually want to do. During the resupply phase, any unit that didn't have an order, so like this recon had the bluff and my lieutenant didn't have an order, they get to move. So the initiative player would move all of his non-ordered units, and then the opponent would move all of his. I mean, that's the basics. Combat is really easy too. All the information is here on the counter. Let's see if I can. I doubt I can zoom into where this would make sense. So let's take a peek at one of the counters here. See if I can do the in-hand focus thing. So down here, this will tell you the movement, their combat stats. This shield that points down, that's their inherent defense. These ones that point away, that's their attack. So they get a +2 attack against infantry, +1 attack against light vehicles, and are not able to attack heavy vehicles like tanks. And then because they're infantry, they get a yellow defense. So you look at the half track. Half track has a purple shield, so you know that if my infantry where attack value. And then that +1 to the 6. So this infantry, when they attack, they get a +1 when attacking light vehicles. Oops, moving. All right, and that's basically how you determine what it takes to attack. Now on the boards, let's move this. There's terrain elements here. So, for example, this will show me that heavy vehicles, light vehicles, they can't enter this terrain because they have a no movement symbol. Now, your infantry, when they move in, they have to stop because that tells you no movement. So even if they had like 4 movement, they'd be like 1 and then stop. Here, there's no passing. So that little symbol there means you can't diagonally pass through. And then this little shield symbol tells me that if I have infantry unit, that infantry gets a +2 defense. So no vehicles, infantry stops when they come into it, gives a +2 defense to infantry in it, and then this blocks line of sight. So some terrain, not here on this board that I've seen yet, but some later on, instead of an X for a line of sight, they might have like a -1, so you could see through it, but there's a -1 to hit because it's hard to see through it like smoke. Alright, but these here you can't see through, you can't shoot through it. So terrain will make a small effect on your combat rolls. Let's see here. So if I was going to attack, let's say my support team, here it's some Germans. The distance, I like this because they've taken figure scale to ground scale into account a little bit. You can shoot as far as you can. So basically there's no limit, like you can't, there's no, this guy can only shoot 4 unless I was gonna say, well, just in case, some counters will say he has a limit of 4 because he's got like a pistol or something. But if your counter has no limitation value, you can shoot 20-30 squares. However, if your target is 7 squares away, you get a -1 to hit. It's either -1 or -2. But they have taken long range into account. Some counters will have bonuses that negate that penalty because they're like snipers. But to fight, it's easy. You roll a die 6. So like this was a 2. Well, let's roll the American. So if I was shooting at the German, I roll my die 6. I take my 3 plus my 2 value against infantry. That gives me an attack value of 5. If I had cards, like I've got cards that modify assault, so if I had a card that will modify my firing roll, I could add that. But I take my 3 plus 2 is 5, and then I would compare that against the defense value of the unit. Now this German squad is a 4. So if he was in the open, I would be able to shoot him because my 5 is higher than his 4. But because he's in the hedge, this hedgerow gives a +2 defense to the defending unit. So my 5 is less than his defending 6, so that would not be a hit. If I had rolled a 4, then my total attack would be 6 to his defensive 6. That would be a hit. And he has a symbol that says flip over when you take damage. And then this is the wounded side of that unit, which modifies his defense and attack values. And then boom, you just move on to the next activation. So it plays quick. I've read that folks have said this game kind of reminds them and plays like a miniatures game, and it kind of does. It doesn't have all the heavy charts that I'm used to seeing in a board game, but the play runs quickly and smooth like a miniatures game. So it's hard to describe that feeling until you play it yourself, but it's quick, it works. Assault is similar. Only units that have this dagger icon, they can assault. So to assault is part of your move. I can move 3, so I'd move 1, and then I'd put it here on top of my target unit, and then we roll dice. And if my opponent has that symbol, the dagger, that means he's also trained in assault. Assault, you roll 2 dice. So I could roll my 2 dice, and I take the higher result. So I'm going to take my 3 plus my combat value. That gives me 5. And then you compare it against the opponent's roll. Now, because he has the icon, he gets to roll 2 dice. If he did not have the icon, he would only roll 1 die. But since he's got the dagger, I could roll my 2 dice, keep my 4, add my attack. So with assault, it's a little bit different than, say, shooting. You don't take your defense value, you take your attack value, because they're like attacking at the same time. So I would take my 4 plus my 1. Now, the German unit gets to add his defense for the terrain. The Americans don't. So sometimes attacking into a defended area is tough. You might want to suppress your opponent first. But let's just say they charged in. There's a chance that because the Germans in a defended spot, I'd have to roll really good, or to help if I had a card that gave me a bonus to assault. So like if I did that, I could take my card, which gives a +2, my 3 plus my +2, so that'd give me 2, 5, 7 attack. And the defender, this defender, because I have him on his wounded side, he has, he only has a +1 attack value. So 1 plus his 4 plus the 2 for the terrain that he's in gives him a 6. He loses at combat. And then because when you lose, you take basically a step loss. He'd be eliminated because he was on the wounded side. Winner goes into that hex. And then they got rules if you lose. So it's all designed to play quickly, which is great. You can set up, play a couple games in an hour, 2 hours. You could play maybe 3 games, easy, 3 or 4 games, depending on your scenario. The more complicated scenarios would take longer. But like this first game, you could easily play this 2 or 3 times in an hour. And I say that because my first game that I played, just to show you kind of how that ended up, I had where's my infantry team? Basically, the files landed in the number 2 spot, and I had my fire team actually was coming up this way, so they moved on to the board. It was like 1, 2, 3, and then the very next turn they just happened to move up here. I moved them into the hedge for protection and hoping the files would drop there. I tried to move all my people close to one of the potential drop spots. My infantry was over here, my support team was down here, and my lieutenant was hiding back here. So when the files dropped, the Germans actually had, close to the area, they didn't get up here till about the 3rd turn, but they essentially had, I had a squad over here. But really they were doing the same thing. They were trying to rush up to, these potential drop spots too. So to pick the files up, it says you have to end your movement adjacent to one of the spots where the files drop. They drop on this middle spot, so as long as you stop movement here, and even if your movement's 0, so because he was already here, I had to use his entire turn 3, or all of turn 2. Let's see, it was about turn 3. Turn 3, he got here and just waited to pick up the files. So I couldn't leave right away, but that gave enough time for the Germans to come up. And then during the supply part of turn 3, the half-track came on. Half-track has a move of 6. So I had my half-track just drive right up here. Then on turn 4, the Germans, they assaulted the half-track, and they assaulted my infantry team, and both assaults failed. So during all of that time, because you alternate, I think I made him his first move. His first move was to move on to the half-track, and so the Germans were alternating assaults. So my half-track, I had the number 2 order. So basically all he did then was drove backwards and right off the map edge and won the game. So they gave you 6 turns. This was over by turn 4, and the Germans didn't even have a chance to chase down and try to prevent it. So I can see, depending on how luck is, where the files drop, how your troops are, where you move your half-track, the game can be over very quickly. So 6 turns is probably pretty fair. It's a good game. I like it quite a bit. I really like the quality of the components. The counters are thick and they're huge, so you can see your troops very well. One thing I liked, I saw this on their Kickstarter page. Here's a Panzer IV. Now this Panzer IV has a lot of combat data on it, so we won't go over all of that. But what's neat is these cards were designed in such a way, or cards, but the counters, that they will support and hold a 15mm miniature. So the artwork is great, but if you have painted up some 15mm minis, or you could even go smaller, you can just take like some tacky glue and then you got your miniatures. And I honestly think that's why some people said, this gives them the feel of the miniatures game, is because it's kind of designed to support miniatures as well. So I guess if you were brave, if you had the minis, you could just put the minis on the map directly and then have your data card, your counter here off to the side. That way you could track the combat values. And I like that because the game comes with a few vehicles, but if you had a lot of stuff, these are my 20mm scale, but I got my 15s are hidden away somewhere. But if you had a lot of tanks, then you could just use the counter here off to the side. There's your combat values, and now you could play just an all open armored warfare game based on your vehicle values right there. So I think that's one reason they kind of said, hey, this has a miniatures feel to it because it's kind of compatible with miniatures. It looks nice. So it plays quick. So not a lot of chart looking up. Roll the dice. It's either 1 attack die, 2 for assault, and you're good to go. But that's, I was going to say a basic overview, but that's pretty long in 2 parts. So I appreciate you watching. If you have any questions about the game, comments, leave them down in the comments box. I enjoy talking about the games I play. I don't know, I'm not a very good camera person, so I might not be able to do like a full playthrough. I could try. I just kind of wanted to share how the game works a little bit, but if you want to see a playthrough, let me know, and I'll see what I can do. Other than that, thank you very much for checking it out. Talk to you later. Bye.